Hello, puppies and kittens. I'm meeting with one of my patrons today who says he has some questions about what he said were quick and possibly silly questions, so have a little bit of patience regarding evolution. And so I'll be happy to help how I can. Keegs, how do you do, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
It's all right. It's all right. What time is it for you?
It's 9 a.m. or close to
All right. And that's tomorrow, right? So it's 9 a.m. Sunday.
in the future. Yeah.
All right, then. Well, nice to have this voice from the past. Okay. So, what is it? What's your first question, sir?
My first question was you said that we all have a single female Homo sapien ancestor and single male Homo sapien ancestor, but they lived at different locations and time periods. How is that? How does that work?
When you trace down genetics, of course, the mitochondria is inherited through the maternal line, and the Y chromosome, of course, is inherited from your father. You don't inherit that from your mother. So when you trace mitochondrial DNA, eventually you track back the network of lineages down through the generations, and pretty quickly, other people in your family, you've all gotten your common ancestor. Your whole family has become one thread, and then distant cousins and everything become a conjoining thread, and you go on down, and so you have your Australian ancestors, your European ancestors eventually conjoin with other lineages until there's fewer and fewer lines tracing into one. I hope this makes sense.
Yeah,
You
that
follow
does.
me
Yeah.
so far? Okay, so then when they come down to one final ancestor for all Europeans, for all Asians, for all Africans, whatever, then again we have these lines still converging. Now, Africa being the oldest group of people has the most diversity. So once we trace everything into Africa, there's still quite a lot of tracing left to do. And so like every region of Africa all traces back into one central source. There's a whole lot of variety, genetic variety, more so in Africa than everywhere else combined.
Mhm.
So when you trace back these genetic lineages through the mitochondrial DNA, and then when you get down to like the common ancestor for all of them, they do something called a molecular clock, where they estimate average mutation rates. These are significant mutations because everybody gets like an average of 128 mutations per zygote, but we're talking about significant mutation rates, which is a different kind of a metric. And these estimate back to I can't remember what the figures are for mitochondrial Eve or which one, because there's successive ones depending on how they're being measured. But the the age for that one, you have to remember that mitochondrial Eve, whatever that individual was, she's not the first woman. She's living in a population of other people,
Mhm.
and all of those other lineages that that arose at that point eventually filtered out. That certain groups became dominant, others faded away. I'm the last of my family, etc. And then other families kind of took over and dominated. Eventually, they all weed out, and then everybody ends up being like one lineage. It's
So
hard
does
to
that mean?
explain it without. I kind of want to use animations
Yeah,
to
that'd
explain
be
it.
great. That I think that'd be fantastic if you could.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any animations on tap to explain this because it is kind of a difficult concept to try to
It is
imagine
like
how.
I'm recording the screen because I'm going to have to go back and watch what you said about 5 times to understand it completely. But I
Well,
do understand the basic concept.
well, you understand how one family becomes two families, becomes four families, and so on, and then they split. But of course, not everybody survives, and then they continue to split as they continue to branch off, and other lineages will drop out, and so eventually you can trace whoever's alive all come down to one surviving thread throughout all those millions of people that were alive at that time. So if I remember correctly, mitochondrial Adam lived sometime before. Oh, excuse me, Y chromosome Adam lived sometime before mitochondrial Eve, and again he's living in a population of people, and many lineages dispersed, and his line eventually connects with her line, and then we wouldn't know it. It certainly wouldn't be seen at the time. They would eventually become those lineages. That combination of lineages would eventually account for everybody.
So the Y chromosome is more ancient than the mitochondrial.
I don't remember, honestly. I think his was 100,000 years earlier or something like that. But it's
Okay.
not that either one is older. What we're talking about is in the interweaving network of ancestor descendant relationships and all these combined family trees.
Mm-hmm.
That eventually we get to our end position and we trace our line back, and it's filtering through all of these other lines that no longer exist. So there was always populations, always plenty of people. It's just that their genetic record doesn't continue to exist.
Okay, right. Yeah. This wasn't something that you said, but I've heard that we have twice as many female ancestors as male ancestors. Is that true? Is it even
I
possible?
I have not heard that.
Okay, that was something Jordan Peterson said, so it
I
might
would.
be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, if mammals and reptiles separated in an early clade, were the animals there basal to both forms, or more mammalian or reptilian, or is it impossible to know?
Well, reptile is often, especially since the 1800s, in the 1800s, in Darwin's day, reptile was considered to be like a grade or a stepping stone. Like the what was used to be conceptualized as the evolutionary ladder was the concept that they started with. And so they have, fish, and then higher step is amphibian, and higher step is reptile, and higher step is mammal. And to some degree, that's also evident in the development of the brain. We have a fish part of the brain, an amphibian part of the brain, and the fish part is the most core, and then you have an amphibian covering over that, and then you have the reptilian cortex over that, and then you have the cerebellum, the mammalian gray matter. So there's some truth to the grade concept, but the
Mm-hmm.
way we define reptile now is not the way that they defined it 150 years ago. Reptile and mammal now are divided differently. There's reptiles would be sauropsids, or the easiest way to put it would be that they are diapsids, meaning that their skulls have two temporal fenestra, whereas mammals are synapsids, having only one. And the one that we have is up in here, and it's sealed in now, but you can see on the side of the human skull, you can still make out the shape of where the hole used to be. So in the division between what would become mammals and what would become reptiles, the basis is what Sir Richard Owen would have called a reptile if he had an example of one. If he were able to go back in time and look at them, he would call them reptiles. We don't call them reptiles, but we now call them like cotylosaurs or whatever. The distinction's not necessarily important. We would call them amniotes if we want to stay systematically consistent in monophyly.
Because you said that birds are considered reptiles now, right?
Yes.
Okay, right. Is that is one of the reasons because they have a cloaca?
Because they're from the diapsid line.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
everything diapsid is typically seen as it's a little more complex than the way I'm explaining it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean,
I'd imagine it would be.
yeah. But birds are a subset of dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are a subset of archosaurs. Archosaurs are a subset of reptiles.
Mm-hmm. Well, the two mammalian cloaca animals live here with me. I've only seen one of them, but I've never. Oh no, I have seen a platypus. There you go.
So you've got the platypus, and then, as I understand it, two species or maybe two genera of echidna.
Echidna. Yeah.
And there were obviously a whole lot more in the fossil record, and not all of them went extinct with the dinosaurs. Some of them persisted beyond that, but not into our time. So there used to be a whole bunch more different types of mammals that all laid eggs and all had a cloaca and so forth. The division of the anus and vagina is a relatively recent one for eutherians. I think metatherians come right after that. Metatherians, including but not limited to marsupials,
Mm-hmm.
are one of the earliest groups to have the division between so that they don't have a cloaca anymore. And then hot in pursuit of that are the what the word escapes me, because it's not just eutherian mammals, it's a subset of eutherian mammals. But never mind, that's fine. We'll stick with eutherian.
because whenever I debate creationists, they always hit me with the line about mutations never being beneficial. But you've spoken about bacteria having beneficial mutations, being able to dissolve nylon or plastic.
Yeah,
But
not
can you give
just
me?
not just bacteria either. There have been a number of mutations identified in people. So
Oh
I
yeah,
want
that's what I was going to ask. Do you have an example of a mutation being beneficial in a larger organism, such as a dog or seal or fish or human?
several actually,
Mm.
and probably my favorite. This was one that my 14-year-old son was challenged on by an Institute for Creation Research guy, Frank Sherwin, tried to challenge my son on this point. Name me a beneficial mutation. And my son rattled off LRP5 function. That's definitely beneficial, isn't it? Because my son was angry, but he was 14, and he said LRP5. What the hell is Frank Sherwin going to say about that? What the hell does that even mean? So there's a number of different types of hyperdense muscles that can come from this type of mutation, and some of them do have egregious side effects. But there's one family that have been identified that don't have any side effects whatever. They just have virtually unbreakable bones. And then,
Really?
yeah, if you combine that mutation with a double copy of a particular myostatin mutation, you have twice the musculature of a regular human and half the fat. And that's just if your mother had a copy, your father had a copy, you get a double copy from them. You will be Herculean in your
Hmm.
physique without ever going to the gym. You just have twice as much muscle mass to work with.
I definitely
So
don't have that,
yeah,
unfortunately.
like it would be a bit like being a chimpanzee where you just look like you got it. You don't gotta work it out. It's already there. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a mutation we can envy, and there's a handful more.
It's like kangaroos here. I don't know if you've ever seen how muscular those guys
Yes.
are. Yeah. It's scary.
Yeah, they are amazing. Of course, I think everybody's seen that video of the giant roo that's got this guy's dog
And
around the
he
neck
punches them. Yeah.
and stuns the roo.
Well, yeah, I'd imagine the Roo would have no idea about what happened because he's never been struck from that far.
Yep, yep, yep. So yeah,
Um,
there's a handful of mutations that have been positively identified, and this is not just within people, but I wanted to make sure that people understood that there are mutations just within humanity that have been identified as beneficial, and there's some for controlling HDL serum cholesterol, and there's one type of mutation that allows you to absorb more oxygen in the blood, and thus you can withstand being at higher altitudes. So the people in Tibet have this particular mutation, and then the people in the Andes have a different mutation, completely different mutation, but has a similar effect, so
so it's
that
more
they can both
convergent.
process more oxygen in the blood. Different mutations, but both achieve the same goal.
Yeah, right. Um, what's that disease that because they often talk about that as malaria that ended up being dominant in some parts of Africa because the sickle cell mutation meant that you could
Yeah,
survive malaria.
yeah, that's one of the most commonly cited examples, and it's not the best
Yeah,
by far. I mean, it is a good
it's
example.
obviously not beneficial in most ways.
Yeah, it's sufficient, I guess,
Mm,
as an example, but it's not. I mean, I know so many better ones. That,
hmm.
and then there was another one. I wish I could remember the name for this one. And this awards the natural selective pressure was brought about during the Black Plague. And I can't remember the nomenclature for this one, but it's a mutation that predominates in Europeans. That if you have this mutation, then you are particularly resistant to, if not immune to, AIDS.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
I
Now,
haven't heard of
I
that one.
haven't seen anything conclusive about that in over 10 years since I've seen the original study, so I don't know how valid that is.
Hmm.
I haven't followed up on it since then, but I mean that's what I was reading at the time.
Yeah. Okay, the
We
next
have a
one
number
was
of others, like in Mexico. A number of people were tested from around the world, and 100% of the people that were tested in Mexico had this mutation called PAX9, and it results in the anagenesis of the third molar, meaning that they don't ever grow the third wisdom tooth. Now, because we have the same number of teeth as the other apes, but we have a smaller jaw than the other apes, even though our teeth are smaller too, there's no room for them all in some cases. So some people...
Yeah, I know that all too well. I've had to have them all removed, except for one.
Yeah.
I need surgery for.
Yeah, so imagine what happened before the days of dentistry. What would happen?
I imagine many of our ancestors died in agony.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not an intelligent design, but
No, definitely not.
but if you're lucky enough to have this particular mutation, which apparently emanates from Mexico, then you won't develop those teeth and you will never suffer that morbidity. So it's one of the things that they tried to suggest in Gattaca. If we could just get these mutations, identify how to encode them into the embryo, and it's not that they don't have the technical know-how; it's an ethical thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we know that this all three of the mutations are what, the hyperdense bones, the double muscularity with half of the fat, the HDL serum cholesterol thing, the not anagenesis of the third molar, and a handful of others. We could just be encoding these into the embryo, but people get all weird about that.
Yeah, I suppose it's like a weird sort of eugenics, isn't it?
Well, no, eugenics is actually, it's a funny thing how eugenics is always associated with evolution when religion has been practicing that since the dawn of time.
Mm-hmm.
Religion, what eugenics is preferential breeding. So when you try to like in Islam, in European invasion of Islam, there was a number of people that said that they were simply, the plan was that they were going to outbreed the Europeans and thus Islamify Europe. And that didn't, this was a plan that a number of imams had expressed verbally. So, this is what they call positive eugenics, where you try to outbreed the others. And that's not going to work because they forgot to account for attenuation. In other words, the people are born Muslim, they don't stay Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
They grow up and if they're not living in a Sharia country, then they're like, I'm out. I don't believe this crap. Okay, but then there's the negative eugenics, which is more than just trying to outbreed. You also try to control or restrict the breeding of the not favored population. And religion had been doing that forever too. One example of that is the hundreds of skeletons of indigenous babies that are found underneath all of these Catholic churches in Canada.
Yeah, I've been reading about that.
Well, this is one of many examples. Religion has always been doing eugenics, positive and negative, whereas evolution, not so much. Evolution is blamed for this thing that they don't do. The religion all along. But then religion likes to blame everybody else for doing what they're doing and pretending that they're not the ones doing it.
Yeah, what's that called when people do that? Because I see that all the time. This particular guy on Instagram
it's the tu quo qui fallacy. It's projection, but I call it the pot calling the silverware black.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's this guy that he was trying to say that Adolf Hitler. Oh no, Darwin was a racist. That was the first one. Then that Adolf Hitler was an evolutionist. And I just watched your videos on the exact topic, and I tried to have a go at him, but he's more vile than Kent Hovind, man. Like, I'm gonna send you his handle after this because I'd like. I was
always irritated at that claim because I read Darwin and I realized, okay, I've seen the one quote that everyone points to, and the thing that they don't understand about that was that talking in terms of higher and lower life forms and basing things on color of skin, that was ubiquitous throughout anthropology in his day. Carolus Linnaeus, who invented taxonomy 100 years earlier, was way worse. He classified people into 6 different species. Two of them being chimpanzees and orangutans. Yeah, but then he classified, European white people, African black people, Asian yellow people, and American red people. Yeah, and then he put all his little racist spins on everything. But if you read Darwin's book, Descent of Man, you see him starting out talking like all of the other anthropologists in his day. But then as the book goes further into the exploration, Darwin comes to an epiphany, which unfortunately he didn't get credit for. Franz Boas got credit for it 16 years later. Franz Boas, famous for saying that there was only one human race, because he said it in the bumper sticker T-shirt fashion, whereas Darwin had a whole ridiculous paragraph, almost a whole page, explained or dedicated to making the same thought. But I mean, really, Darwin said it first. He was too verbose to be remembered for it, but he said it first, that there was only one race of people, when everybody else, Louis Agassiz, said that there were 6 different races. And he is the Christian. He's saying that God created all these races in different colors on different continents with the intent that they remain separate.
Yeah, well, yeah, most of the radical right wing, they're all hardcore religious, like the KKK, Nazis, all that.
The KKK do identify as an exclusively creationist organization, and they state on their page that they do not believe in evolution. Although there have been some Nazis, or no, not Nazis, some Klansmen that have gotten on the news to say that they think that other races evolved, just not white people. And then they get to fight over which white people are the real white people.
It's one of the issues I have with religious people is their demand to be special, and that's just like, let's see how this. They've just gone a step above again.
It does seem to be all about superiority and inferiority, which is a racist position, and which Darwin spoke against. Hitler was talking about the superior race all the time, and Darwin said that superiority or inferiority was determined by traits, and one species being superior in one thing would be inferior in something else, and so it's all relative. It's all relative. So when people say that Darwin was a eugenist, he absolutely was not. They blame him for the Australian genocide, when Darwin was complaining when he got there that was already well underway and that he was against it. Now, this is decades before he wrote his book. How is it his fault?
It's not. Definitely not.
And then they say that Hitler was a Darwinist? Absolutely not. Hitler utterly rejected. Hitler was a creationist. And he explains in Mein Kampf that he believes in creation, that he only accepts evolution within kinds, and that you can't create new kinds, and that belief in what he called the belief in macroevolution, what he called the evolution of new kinds, was a violation against belief in the eternal creator. So Hitler was not a Darwinist. Darwin was not a eugenist. That's just a bunch of crap and propaganda.
Absolutely. That's what I tried to explain to this guy. Yeah, no, he's vile. He's actually taking your videos now and putting them on Instagram and talking shit over the top of them. So, one of the things he talked about was these dinosaur bones being aged at 40,000 years old and having flesh and blood inside. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, I'm doing a piece on these right now. No, they don't. Just flat out, no, they don't. They were not dated to 40,000 years old, and they never had flesh or blood inside. What they found was, remember, because this is the fossilization process, and in the fossilization process, when you have something that is it's buried and insulated, and then over time, heavier materials creep in and replace the organic material, so you end up with silicates. So that most things are replaced by rock or what have you. But blood is based on, or at least vertebrate blood is based on iron. And iron's pretty heavy. So in a well-insulated fossil, you can still have the iron, but iron's not going to be replaced by anything. So what you end up with is an iron molecule called heme.
Which looks
not
red.
Blood. It's red. It looks like blood because that's where the blood was. That's where the blood cell was. And you're looking at a fossilized blood cell. And there was no flesh ever found. What they found was they found the traces of blood veins, for example, blood vessels. And these are, again, they're you only find these materials in the deepest core of big bones that are well insulated. And they have to be perfectly insulated in order to find anything at all. And then when you find it, it's only microscopic. And then when you find even the microscopic bits, you can't find any elasticity to them until you leave it soaking in an acid bath for weeks. And
Mm-hmm.
the acid bath basically defossilizes it. It removes the silicate. It returns it back to kind of its more or less original material. But it has to have all of this chemical treatment to do that. So no flesh. It's the fossilization, the remnants of the blood veins, the remnants of the blood cells. No flesh ever found. And Mary Schweitzer, I've been trying to get an interview with her forever. I don't think she answers my calls because she knows I'm an atheist. So maybe that's why she doesn't. But I would love to have an interview with her. She has complained publicly a number of times, at least in writing, that she hates how young Earth creationists distort and misrepresent her work. She was herself a young Earth creationist when she went to work in that paleontology lab. If she's discovered proof of young Earth creationism, why is she now an old Earth evolutionist, but still a Christian? So she's complaining that Christians are misrepresenting her work in order to distort it into some kind of lie that they want to make believe that she herself does not believe and cannot believe anymore because she knows better.
And using carbon dating on something that's old is always going to yield the same results, right? You can't use. It was like you were talking about the scales before. It'd be like using a bathroom scale to weigh a car. You're always
Exactly.
going to max it out.
Exactly. I mean, so you have with carbon dating is not really used in paleontology. I mean,
It's too old, right?
but yeah. See, the creationists don't understand the difference between paleontology and archaeology. They think everything is archaeology, and radiocarbon dating is used in archaeology a lot, but not so much in paleontology because it's no good. If you have a half-life of 50,000 years, and you know that when you get on the upper end of that, you're going to get wildly unreliable figures. Then, like we said, you weigh. If you're gonna weigh an ounce of sugar, you're not going to put it on your bathroom scale, and likewise, you're not going to park your car in your bathroom scale because you have to get the right unit of measure. And then, in order to know whether it's true or not, then you have to have other means of corroborating it. And of course, with all of these different methods, there are other means of measure that we can test against and say, yep, this is right.
I'm so glad you're doing a video on that because when I saw that, I'm like, this can't be right. I remember Potholer 51, is that his name?
54.
He did something on it a while ago, but I couldn't find the video when I went to look for it. So
I think were you possibly talking about the one about it wasn't fossilization, it was
concretion.
Yes.
Yeah. Where they got hats and put them in water, and yeah.
It's funny that I want my videos to be funny, and I'm always too serious in my videos, and I watch his, and his genuinely are funny, and I just need to take a
You
moment.
get a couple of laughs out of me every now and then, but I appreciate the seriousness. To be honest, we need diversity,
Well, thank you much.
So the next one was horses and donkeys can have different number of chromosomes depending on the species of horse, and yet can produce mostly infertile young. Why? And is it therefore feasible that we were able to create a human/other great ape hybrid?
There was a mule I remember got in the news because it was fertile, and mules are supposed to be always exclusively infertile. But when you have mutations, things can alternate either way to some degree, and it's possible to roll a dice and end up with something that is still, if in two animals that are still very closely related, where they might still be compatible if both sides roll the dice the right direction. I hope that makes sense. Well, we're talking about random mutations and the variability. So what it is when you have two closely related organisms, if they can still reproduce and bring forth after their kind, fertile offspring, then they are the same species. The Bible's definition of what a kind is exactly the same thing as the biological species concept. They are the same. So creationists make up this other meaning for kind, knowing that they've already lost the argument about whether speciation can happen. So then they try to move the goalposts back by redefining that word, but we know better. The Bible gives a definition of it. It's biological species. There you go. And then when I say the further apart two things are, like if you have one population initially and then you divide it into two groups. So in either group, new mutations are arising in every individual all the time, and some of those mutations will become common throughout that population, but they're unique mutations. The mutations that are happening over here are not the ones that are happening over here, and vice versa. So that very soon, if you take one group and put them in the north, one group and put them in the south, or however you want to divide it, it won't be very many generations long before you can, if there's a lone interloper between the two, you would be able to look at its features and identify which group it came from.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they're still genetically compatible, right? But at some point, they won't be. The longer they remain isolated, the more of these accumulated mutations build up, the less likely they will be to be able to intermingle and produce viable offspring. They can produce infertile hybrids, and then after that, they can't produce anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
They become further and further separated. So two species of the same genus could produce a hybrid, but two species in different genera, even within the same family, could not. Now, that's not a consistent way of division. That's the one that I like to use for illustrative purposes. The reason it's not consistent is because people were already naming things in families and genera before they accepted what evolution is. And unfortunately, a lot of scientists adhere to tradition and don't correct these classifications. Cheetahs and cougars should be in the same genus, not two different ones.
Yeah, I've heard that cougars aren't even technically big cats.
That's right. They're felines.
Yeah.
So it could be, and this is not an official taxon either. I mean, you have panthers and all other cats, but all other extant cats could be classified as felines.
Well, I
Just to
heard
make
that
a distinction between them and panthers.
all big cats are under Panthera, so any black large cat could be technically a black panther.
Doesn't have to be black.
Mm-hmm.
Leopards, jaguars can both be black or spotted, and they're very
Mm-hmm.
closely related again. And lions and tigers and leopards are all panthers. And then I think the clouded leopard and maybe one other are all panthers. But then every other cat is just a cat. Rather than just say just a cat, I'd rather say felines. You just show a distinction. And cheetahs and cougars are more like house cats than they are like lions.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're definitely smaller.
And if you look at a caracal, which is an African species, it's interesting because the caracal looks just like a cougar, just smaller. It looks exactly like an American cougar, except it has pointed ears with little tufts on them. That's it. That's the only difference.
Oh yeah, people have them as pets. They call them floppers. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, because of their ears.
Yeah, I've never seen that.
Okay, the next question was see, I wrote these when I was tired, man. I don't know if it even makes sense. I said, why is chromosome development not linear in species such as butterflies? Because you mentioned in that debate with Kent Hovind how the variation in chromosome in butterfly species varies from like 20 to 156 or something. But like with us and other great apes, like who is it? Is it gorillas or chimpanzees that we're closest to? We only have the variation of one chromosome.
It's all the other apes except us have oh, am I getting my numbers right?
43 and 42. That's the difference, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, but I was thinking in pairs, but I don't want to say it and be wrong because I'm having these things off the top of my head too.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that the chimpanzee chromosome number 2, and then their final chromosome that we don't have, those two fused.
Yeah.
And that's what humans have.
Mm.
So we still have the chimpanzee, 24th and 2nd chromosome, but they're stuck together in us. And not every change in chromosome has a specific result, like Down syndrome is a chromosomal variance, but not every one of them has that same kind of impact. So there would be a point in early humanity when you would have one population that had multiple chromosomes that could still interbreed. I mean, they had variable chromosomes that could still interbreed.
Okay, right. Yeah. This is the last one. I've heard that people have Neanderthal DNA present in their genome. I don't know if that's the right word for it. Do we all possess this DNA, and is there any other humanoid DNA present?
There may be some other humanoid DNA. They found a ghost lineage in DNA that they think might belong to Homo erectus. I think they found the ghost lineage in Neanderthals and Denisovans. But the problem is, all we have of their genome is a tiny fraction, so it's hard to tell a whole lot of this. But they found a common bond that they think is Homo erectus. And what happened with humans, so these are all humans technically, since they're all in the genus Homo, but people tend to think of Homo sapiens as human and everybody else is not. Well, I try to say sapiens. Not everybody has Neanderthal DNA. The people whose families have always been in Africa don't have Neanderthal DNA.
Okay.
So when migrants came out through that corridor in the Levant, where Neanderthals were, there was some intermixing. Not a lot, surprisingly. Maybe 100 instances or something like that. I can't remember what the exact number was, but it was, over the course of 100,000 years, to have so few intermingling events. I mean, it's still sufficient because the descendants of all those groups branched out, and so those few intermingling events proliferated. So it looks like a lot more than it is. But the people who passed through this area in the Levant to move east into the Orient or into Asia, they got that intermingling with the Neanderthals and have a maximum of 4% of Neanderthal DNA. So it varies from nothing to 4%. And people in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, don't have any Neanderthal DNA.
Yeah, right. Okay. Those are all my questions.
All right. I'm almost wishing now that I had you write them down so that I could look up a couple of them, because I always have these senior moments, where where you can't recall everything off the top of your head. And was that the right number or name or whatever? So I'm sure that geneticists are going to be wanting to put in some pedantic modification onto anything I've said, and they're welcome to do that. I need all the help I can get.
You seem like a very busy man, so.
Well, thank you. I've been working on this script for days. I just got back from an Austin convention, and I should have been on top of it already, but I had to do another Quran lesson, write another Quran lesson, which we're going to be covering tomorrow. And I had a couple of podcasts with this one and another interview earlier this morning, and I'm still trying to write this other script that I was supposed to have had done days ago, and it's going to be done hopefully by the end of this month. But yeah, it's a little busy.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it. All right, I'll go ahead and close it up. Keegs.
See you later.
Bye-bye.